The music at the Celestial Anchor was always designed to be mathematically perfect and emotionally sterile. It was the kind of rhythmic humming that made you want to either sign a mining treaty or fall asleep into your synthetic cocktail. I was leaning toward the latter. The grand atrium was a sprawling cathedral of glass and steel, suspended in the silent embrace of a dead neutron star. Outside the reinforced viewports, the violet nebula of the riftward territory swirled like spilled ink in a bucket of stars. I took another sip of my drink. It was a neon purple concoction called Starlight Synth Gin. It tasted like industrial solvent mixed with a hint of regret. Silas, if you drink any more of that, your liver is going to file a formal complaint with the Earth Alliance, a voice hissed in my ear. I didn't turn around. I knew that tone. That was Kestrel Vance, my handler, my conscience, and the woman currently responsible for making sure I didn't cause an interstellar incident before midnight. She was a professional through and through, her uniform pressed so sharply you could probably cut a steak with her lapels. Liver's fine, Kess, I muttered, my eyes scanning the room. It's my soul that's suffering. Look at this place. It's a morgue with better lighting. It's a diplomatic summit, Silas. It's supposed to be boring. Boring is safe. Boring doesn't involve orbital bombardments. She had a point. But I was bored. And when I get bored, my brain starts looking for the nearest exit or the nearest mistake. Usually they're the same thing. The crowd was a mosaic of biology that would make a xenobiologist weep with joy. There were the Krieg Collective delegates, looking like upright lizards in silk robes, whispering to their data slates. There were the gaseous entities from the gas giants of Sector 9, floating in their containment spheres like angry clouds. And then there was the center of the room, or rather, the hole in the center of the room. A wide circle of empty space had formed near the observation deck. It wasn't because the floor was wet, it was because of her. She stood alone. She was umbral, which meant she was tall, slender, and had skin the color of a storm cloud just before it breaks. Her hair was a cascade of midnight silk, woven with silver filaments that glowed faintly in the dim light. She wore a gown of phase veil that shifted from charcoal to deep amethyst as she breathed. On her brow sat a simple angular crown of dark matter glass. But it wasn't the crown that kept people away. It was the weight she carried. She stood there like a monolith of grief and power, looking out at the stars as if she were counting them and finding them wanting. "Who is that?" I asked, my voice dropping. Kestrel didn't even look. "That is Vesper, the Void Matriarch. You don't look at her, you don't talk to her, and you certainly don't go within 5 meters of her unless you want the umbral sovereignty to declare your existence a clerical error." "She looks lonely," I said. "She's a sovereign, Silas. Sovereigns aren't lonely. They're strategically isolated. Now turn around. The Earth Ambassador is about to give a speech about oxygen-sharing protocols, and we need to look like we're paying attention." I should have listened. I really should have. But I'm Silas Thorne, and my primary skill is making life difficult for people who like rules. I watched Vespera. She didn't look like a void matriarch. She looked like a girl who had been invited to a party where everyone was afraid of her breath. I saw her hand twitch slightly against the glass of the observation port, a tiny human-like gesture of restlessness. "I'll be right back," I said. "Silas, Silas, where are you going? Don't you dare!" I was already moving. I crossed the polished floor, my boots clicking with an annoying amount of confidence. As I approached the invisible boundary, the air seemed to grow colder. The hum of the room faded. People stopped talking. I felt 100 eyes on my back, each one a needle of judgment. I stepped into the circle. The 5-meter rule shattered like cheap glass. Vespera Thal didn't move at first. She didn't even turn her head. But I saw the phase veil on her shoulder turn a sharp, jagged red. A warning. I stopped about 2 meters away. Up close, she was even more striking. Her eyes weren't eyes. They were pools of swirling amber light, lacking pupils but full of an ancient, terrifying intelligence. "The music is terrible, isn't it?" I said. My voice sounded loud in the sudden silence of the atrium. Behind me, I heard the faint sound of a Crix delegate dropping a glass. Vespera turned. Her movement was slow, deliberate, like a predator deciding if the prey was worth the effort of a bite. Her gaze landed on me, and for a second, I felt the literal weight of her title. It was like standing in the path of a solar flare. "You are Earthborn," she said. Her voice wasn't a voice. It was a vibration that resonated in my chest, smooth as velvet and heavy as lead. "Guilty as charged," I said, offering my most harmless, "I'm just a guy" smile. "Silas Thorne, cultural liaison and professional wallflower." "You have crossed the line, Silas Thorne." "The floor looked a bit dusty over there. Thought I'd try the view here." "Much better," I said, nodding toward the nebula. "Though honestly, I think the view is better when you're moving." She tilted her head. The silver filaments in her hair pulsed. "Moving?" "Yeah, dancing. Though I use the term loosely when it comes to my own abilities. Most people call it coordinated stumbling." The silence in the room was now absolute. I could feel Kestrel's blood pressure rising from across the hall. I held out my hand. "Would you like to dance, Vespera? Just one. To show these starchy lizards that the anchor hasn't completely sucked the life out of us." Her amber eyes flickered. She looked at my hand as if it were a strange biological specimen. In the umbral culture, I would later learn, a hand offered is a soul bared. To touch the matriarch without a formal petition was a crime punishable by immediate vaporization. But I didn't know that. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't care. For a long, agonizing heartbeat, she didn't move. I was halfway through imagining how they'd ship my remains back to Earth when she reached out. Her fingers were cool like smooth river stones, but beneath the surface I felt a thrumming energy. She placed her hand in mine. "I have not danced in 82 years, she whispered. "Then I'm the perfect partner," I grinned. "I've never danced in my life. Let's make it a disaster together." I led her toward the center of the floor. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. The Crick's delegates looked like they were having collective heart attacks. The Earth ambassador looked like he was contemplating a career change to space hermit. The music adjusted. The anchor's AI, sensing the shift in the room, transitioned into something with a slow, sweeping melody, a cello-like drone that felt like gravity itself was singing. I put my hand on her waist. Her phase veil shifted to a soft, glowing gold. "You're doing great," I whispered as we began to move. "You are a very strange creature, Silas Thorne," she replied, her amber eyes locked onto mine. "I get that a lot," I said, "usually right before I get fired." We moved in a slow circle. For those few minutes, the politics, the wars, the treaties, and the treaties turned into wars didn't exist. There was just the cool weight of her hand and the way she matched my steps with a grace that made me look like I actually knew what I was doing. But then, my comm unit in my ear chirped. It wasn't Kestrel. It was the emergency override. "Silas, you idiot!" Kestrel's voice was a jagged rasp of panic. "Get away from her. Right now. You don't understand what you've done. Look at the monitors." I didn't want to look. I wanted to stay in the dance. But a massive holographic display in the center of the atrium flickered to life. It showed a symbol, an angular crest made of shadows and gold, the shadow seal. Beneath it, text scrolled in 5 different galactic languages. "By the act of the dance, the Earth Alliance has entered the Shadow Covenant. The Void Matriarch has claimed a voice. Silas Thorne is now protected under the law of the night." Vespera stopped. She pulled her hand back, but she didn't look angry. She looked expectant. "The dance is over, Silas," she said, her voice echoing through the silent atrium. "Now the reckoning begins." Before I could ask what the hell that meant, 4 umbral guards in black matter armor materialized from the shadows. They didn't point weapons. They bowed to me. "Liaison Thorne," the lead guard said, his voice a metallic rasp. "The Void Matriarch has summoned you to the Shadow Enclave. You will come with us. Now." I looked at Vespera. Her crown was glowing. The lonely girl was gone. The matriarch was back. "Well," I muttered to myself as the guards closed in, "at least it wasn't a boring party." The Shadow Enclave sounded like a place where dreams went to die and get tax deducted. In reality, it was a restricted sector of the celestial anchor that had been harmonized to umbral preferences. That meant it was dark. Not just turn off the lights dark, but the walls literally eat photons dark. The umbral guards didn't walk. They seemed to glide. their armor absorbing the faint emergency lighting of the corridors. I followed, feeling like a neon sign in a coal mine. "Could we maybe get a flashlight?" I asked the lead guard. "My human eyes are calibrated for, seeing things." The guard didn't respond. He just kept gliding. "Tough crowd," I muttered. My comlink was buzzing incessantly. Kestrel was screaming something about interstellar law and Section 9 non-interference clauses. I reached up and clicked it off. I had enough problems without a lecture on bureaucracy. We reached a massive set of doors that looked like they had been carved from the heart of a dead planet. They didn't open, they dissolved, the matter shimmering away into dust and then reforming once we passed through. Inside was the audience chamber. It wasn't a throne room. It was a garden of bioluminescent flora that looked like glowing jellyfish hanging from the ceiling. In the center sat Vespera. She had removed the crown. She was sitting on a low bench made of obsidian, staring at a small, holographic projection of Earth. "It is a very blue world," she said without looking up. "I find that offensive to my sensibilities, yet somehow peaceful." "It has its moments," I said, stepping forward. The guards remained by the door, melting into the shadows until only their glowing visors were visible. Though we're currently quite fond of the not being in a war vibe, which apparently I just ruined. Vesper looked up. The amber light in her eyes was dimmer now, softer. "You did not ruin it, Silas. You merely accelerated the inevitable. The Kree Collective was looking for a reason to test our borders. They thought Earth was a soft target to use as a proxy. By dancing with me, you signaled that Earth is under my protection." "See, that's the part that's bothering me," I said, leaning against a pillar that felt strangely like cold skin. "I was just asking a girl to dance. I wasn't signing a military alliance. In my culture, a dance is just a dance." "In my culture," Vesper rose, her phase veil rippling with a pale blue light, the color of honesty, I hoped. "A dance is a synchronicity of souls. To allow a stranger to touch my waist is to declare them my vox, my voice. You are the only person in this station who can speak to me without 1,000 protocols, Silas. And more importantly, you are the only one who can tell me the truth." "I'm a liaison, Vespera. My job is to lie politely." "Then you are very bad at your job," she said, a faint, almost invisible smile touching her lips. "Because tonight you were anything but polite. You were sincere. And sincerity is a weapon I haven't seen in a century." I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. "Look, Kestrel, that's my boss, is currently losing her mind. The Earth Alliance is probably preparing a formal apology that involves me being exiled to a moon with no atmosphere. If I stay here, I'm a political liability. If you leave," Vespera stepped closer, her scent hitting me, ozone and ancient spice. "You are a dead man. The Cricks will intercept your shuttle before you clear the anchor's gravity well. They cannot allow the vox of the matriarch to exist outside of their control." I went cold. "You're serious? They'd KIA me over a waltz?" "The Cricks do not play games, Silas. They calculate. And right now, the calculation says you are a variable that needs to be erased." I looked at her, really looked at her. Behind the power and the glowing eyes, I saw it again. The loneliness. She wasn't just protecting me. She was keeping me here because I was the only thing in her life that didn't come with a manual of instructions. "So what's the play?" I asked. "I stay here, drink your weird tea, and wait for the galaxy to stop screaming?" "No," Vesper said, her voice turning sharp. "We go to the Meridian Council. Tomorrow morning, we stand before the 5 empires and we declare the covenant. We show them that Earth is not a pawn and I am not a statue. And if I say no, if I just want to go back to my boring office and my terrible gin?" Vespera reached out. She didn't touch me this time, but her hand hovered near my cheek. I could feel the static of her power. "Then you go back to a world that will never be the same, Silas. You have seen the person behind the matriarch. Can you really go back to pretending she doesn't exist?" I looked at the hologram of Earth. It looked so small from here, so fragile. "I hate it when people are right," I grumbled. "It's bad for my ego." "Is that a yes?" "It's a fine, but I'm choosing the music next time, kind of yes." Vespera's eyes brightened. "Deal." The doors dissolved again, and Kestrel Vance practically tumbled into the room, followed by two very confused-looking Earth security officers. "Silas!" she shouted, her face a shade of red that matched Vespera's warning veil. "What the hell are you doing? I've got the Premier on the line. The Cricks are mobilizing their fleet, and I've got a report here that says you've been claimed by an alien sovereign." I turned to Kestrel, giving her a little two-fingered salute. "Relax, Kess. We're not in a war. We're in a covenant. It's much fancier." "Silas, I will KIA you myself," she hissed. "Later, maybe," I said, looking back at Vespera. "Right now, we've got a council meeting to crash. And Kess, get me a suit. A nice one. If I'm going to be a voice, I might as well look the part." Vespera watched the exchange with a look of genuine amusement. For a second, the Void Matriarch looked almost human. "You are a very difficult man, Silas Thorne," Vespera said softly. "I prefer the term unpredictable," I replied. "Now let's go tell the galaxy to mind its own business." As Kestrel began her 10th lecture of the night, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't bored. I was terrified, yes. I was probably going to die in a diplomatic explosion. But as I looked at the dark-skinned woman standing in the center of her shadow palace, I knew one thing for sure. I'd do the dance again in a heartbeat. The Earth Alliance Embassy on the Celestial Anchor was located in the Highside districts, where the air was filtered to smell like a spring morning in Old Geneva, and the walls were plated with brushed platinum. It was designed to scream stability and wealth, but as I sat in a chair that cost more than my annual salary, the only thing I felt was the impending doom of a man about to be thrown out of an airlock. Kestrel Vance stood by the window, her silhouette sharp against the violet glow of the nebula. She hadn't spoken for 20 minutes. Usually, when Kestrel stopped talking, it meant she was calculating the most efficient way to hide a body. "My body. Liaison Thorne," the voice crackled through the intercom, sounding like a handful of gravel in a blender. "The ambassador will see you now." Kestrel turned, her eyes narrowed. "Try not to joke about his hair, Silas. It is a genuine wig from the 21st century, and he is very sensitive about it." I stood up, adjusting the collar of my rumpled jacket. "Kess, at this point, his hair is the least of our problems. I am officially the protected voice of a woman who can turn off suns. I think I've earned the right to be a little critical of historical fashion." "Don't be a smart mouth, Silas. This isn't a sit-rep from a border skirmish. This is the brass, the top tier, the big game hunters of Earth's political future. You walked onto that dance floor as a nobody, and you walked off as a target. If you glitch this meeting, there won't be enough left of you to fill a shot glass." I shrugged, though my stomach felt like it was being squeezed by a hydraulic press. "I'm already a target, Kess. Might as well be a fashionable one." We walked into the inner sanctum. Ambassador Harrison Miller was a man who looked like he had been carved out of a very expensive, very grumpy ham. He sat behind a desk made of real oak, imported from Earth at a staggering cost, and glared at me through spectacles that were entirely decorative. "Thorne," he barked, not even bothering to offer a seat. "I have spent the last 6 hours on a secure line with the United Nations Oversight Committee. Do you know what they asked me?" I took a breath. If I could recommend a good tailor for the matriarch? Miller slammed his hand onto the oak. "They asked me why a low-level cultural attaché with a disciplinary record longer than a lunar shuttle ride has been declared the Vox of the umbral sovereignty. They asked me if Earth has suddenly decided to abandon neutrality and join a shadow empire that half the galaxy considers a myth and the other half considers a threat." I looked him in the eye. "I didn't mean to trigger the covenant, Mr. Ambassador. I saw a woman who looked like she was drowning in the middle of a crowded room. I asked her to dance. That's it. No hidden agenda, no backroom deals. Just a human being acting like a human being. Acting like a human being is what gets people killed in deep space, Thorne." Miller stood up, pacing the small space. "The Crix Collective has already filed a formal protest. They are claiming that Earth has engaged in a biological exchange ritual with the Umbral without council oversight. They are moving 3 destroyer-class ships into the neutral zone as we speak." I felt the heat rise in my neck. The Crix would move ships if someone coughed too loud near their border. They're looking for a fight, and they're using me as the excuse. Exactly. Miller shouted. "And you gave it to them. You didn't just dance with her. You touched her. In their culture, that touch is a hard link. You are now technically a part of her legal household. You have effectively defected from the Earth Alliance without signing a single piece of paperwork. I glanced at Kestrel. She was staring at the floor, her jaw tight. I'm not a defector, I said quietly. I'm still an Earth liaison. I'm just a liaison who happens to have a very powerful friend. Friend? Miller laughed, a dry, bitter sound. Vespera Thal doesn't have friends, Thorne. She has subjects, she has enemies, and now she has a Vox. You are a tool, a biological microphone she can use to scream at the council. And when she's done with you, she'll discard you like a spent fuel cell. I thought of the look in Vespera's eyes when she spoke about the blue of the earth. I thought of the way she held her hand just a fraction of an inch from my face, as if she were afraid her own power might bruise me. Maybe, I said. But right now, she's the only one offering to keep me alive. If I step outside this embassy without her seal, the Cricks will turn me into space dust before I can say diplomatic immunity. Miller narrowed his eyes. You're a coward, Thorne. I read your file. You were a pilot in the Europa Rebellion. You were slated for a Medal of Valor until you refused to fire on a civilian transport. You ran away from the military because you couldn't handle the pressure, and now you're running into the arms of a monster because you're scared of a few lizard ships. The words hit me like a physical blow. The Europa Rebellion, 10 years ago. I could still see the transport on my tactical display, full of refugees, and the order from the brass ringing in my ears. Clear the sector. No exceptions. I hadn't run because I was scared. I had run because I wanted to be able to look at myself in a mirror. But in the eyes of men like Miller, there was no difference. Courage isn't about following orders, Mr. Ambassador, I said, my voice trembling slightly. It's about knowing which orders are worth dying for. Get out, Miller said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You are officially on administrative leave. If you go to that council meeting tomorrow, you go as a private citizen. Earth disavows any connection to your actions. If the Umbral kill you, we won't complain. If the Cricks kill you, we'll send a wreath. You're on your own, Thorne. I turned and walked out of the room without another word. Kestrel followed me, catching up in the hallway. Silas, wait, she said, grabbing my arm. He's a jerk, okay? He's a high-side bureaucrat who's never seen a day of real combat in his life. Don't let him get under your skin. It's fine, Kess. He's right about one thing. I am scared. Kestrel stopped, looking at me with a soft, rare expression of pity. Everyone is scared, Silas. Anyone who says they aren't is either a liar or a gearhead with a fried processor. I looked at my hands. They were shaking. I haven't been a pilot for a long time. I like being a boring liaison. I like staying in the shadows. But now the shadows are literally following me. Before she could respond, the lights in the corridor flickered and died. For a second, there was only the emergency red glow, and then the air grew cold. 2 Umbral guards stepped out of the wall, not through a door, literally out of the material of the station itself. Their armor was matte black, absorbing all light, and their glowing amber visors fixed on me. Vox Thorne, the lead guard said. The matriarch requires your presence. The 0 hour approaches. I looked at Kestrel. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, palm-sized device. It was an old-school kinetic pistol, illegal on the station, but standard issue for Earth intelligence. She pressed it into my hand. Don't use it unless you have to, she whispered. But if things go south, make sure you take a few of them with you. I tucked the pistol into my waistband, feeling its cold weight against my skin. Thanks, Kess. Try to stay alive, Silas, she said, her voice cracking just a little. I don't want to have to fill out the paperwork for your funeral. It's a real pain in the neck. I gave her a wink, though it felt forced. I'll do my best. I've always been good at being a pain in the neck. I stepped toward the guards. They didn't grab me. They didn't even touch me. They simply turned and began to glide toward the exit. I followed them out of the Earth Embassy, leaving behind the safety of my own kind, and stepping into a world where the sun never rose, and the only thing certain was that the galaxy was watching my every move. We moved through the service corridors of the Anchor, avoiding the main atrium. I saw a few station workers, mostly droids and a couple of weary-looking miners, who froze as we passed. Seeing an Umbral guard was rare. Seeing a human being walking between two of them was unheard of. "Are we taking the shuttle?" I asked, trying to break the oppressive silence. "No," the guard replied. "We are taking the fold." I had heard of umbral fold technology. It was the stuff of ghost stories. They didn't travel through space. They bent it, creating a temporary bridge between 2 points. It was supposedly instantaneous, but it was also incredibly taxing on the human nervous system. We reached a dead end in the ventilation sector. The lead guard reached out and touched the bulkhead. The metal didn't move, but the space in front of us began to ripple like water. A dark, swirling vortex opened up, smelling of ozone and old cold stone. "Step through," the guard commanded. "Do not breathe until you reach the other side." I looked at the vortex. My heart was hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Everything in my body told me to run, to turn back to the Earth Embassy and beg Miller for mercy. But I thought of Vespera. I thought of the way she had looked at the stars. She wasn't a monster. She was just different. And maybe in a galaxy full of lizard men and gaseous clouds, different was what we needed. I squeezed the handle of the pistol in my waistband, took a final deep breath of the recycle station air, and stepped into the dark. For a second, there was nothing. No sound, no light, no gravity. It felt like my atoms were being pulled apart and put back together by a very clumsy child. My lungs screamed for air, and my brain felt like it was being scrubbed with sandpaper. And then, just as I thought I was going to flatline, I hit solid ground. I stumbled forward, gasping for air, my knees hitting a cold, polished floor. The air here was thin and smelled of minerals. I looked up, my vision blurry, and saw that I was back in the Shadow Enclave. But this wasn't the audience chamber. It was a training room. The walls were lined with racks of weapons that looked like they were made of solidified smoke. In the center of the room stood Vespera. She wasn't wearing her gown or her crown. She was dressed in a sleek, charcoal-colored combat suit that moved like a second skin. Her hair was pulled back into a tight, severe braid. "You survived the fold," she said, her voice echoing in the vast space. "That is a good sign. Most humans lose their lunch on the first trip." I wiped a bit of sweat from my brow and stood up, trying to regain some dignity. "I'm a pilot, Vespera. I've survived worse gravity wells than that. Though I'll admit, your elevator service needs work." She didn't smile. She walked toward me, her movements precise and predatory. "We have 10 hours until the council convenes, Silas. In that time, you must learn how to be a Vox. You must learn how to stand, how to speak, and how to survive the psychological warfare that the Crix will unleash upon you." I looked at the weapons on the wall. "Am I going to need one of those?" "I hope not," she said. "But the Crix Collective has a specialized unit known as the Mindstalkers. They use low-frequency telepathic pulses to induce panic in their opponents. If you show a single second of fear, they will tear your mind apart before you can finish your first sentence." I swallowed hard. "Panic? That's my default setting." "Then we must change your settings," she said. She reached out and grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. She led me toward a circular platform in the center of the room. "Stand here," she commanded. I did as I was told. The platform began to glow with a deep, pulsing amber light. Suddenly, the air around me thickened. I felt a weight on my chest, like I was being submerged in water. My vision darkened, and I began to hear voices, thousands of them, whispering insults, fears, and memories of every mistake I had ever made. "Coward," the voices hissed. "You ran from Europa. You're running now. You're nothing but a mistake in a cheap suit." I closed my eyes, my breath coming in short, jagged gasps. It felt like my head was going to explode. "Fight it, Silas," Vespera's voice rang out, clear and calm amidst the chaos. "Fear is just a shadow, and shadows cannot hurt you unless you believe they are solid." I tried to focus on her voice. I thought of the dance. I thought of the cool weight of her hand in mine. I realized that she was scared too. She was the matriarch of a dying empire, surrounded by enemies, and she had chosen to trust a human who couldn't even dance properly. If she could do that, I could do this. I straightened my back. I opened my eyes. The voices were still there, but they felt distant now, like the buzzing of insects on the other side of a window. The amber light was still pulsing, but I didn't feel the weight anymore. I am Silas Thorne, I whispered, and I don't give a damn what you think. The light flickered and died. The pressure vanished. I was standing on the platform, drenched in sweat, but I was still standing. Vespera was watching me, her expression unreadable. For a moment I saw a flash of something in her eyes. Respect. You have the heart of a warrior, Silas, she said softly. Even if you try very hard to hide it, I managed a weak grin. It's a cultural thing. We humans like to keep our hearts in a safe place, usually under a layer of sarcasm and bad decisions. She walked up to me and placed a hand on my shoulder. This time she didn't pull back. Her touch was warm, and for the first time since I had stepped onto this station, I felt a sense of peace. Tomorrow the galaxy will try to break us, she said, but we will show them that even in the darkness, there is a light that cannot be extinguished. I looked at her, and for a second I forgot about the Cricks, forgot about the ambassador, and forgot about the warships in the neutral zone. I'm ready, I said. She nodded once. Good. Now let's talk about your suit. That jacket is truly offensive. I laughed. It was a genuine, honest sound that echoed through the Shadow Enclave. Maybe Miller was right. Maybe I was a coward. But standing there with the Void Matriarch, I felt more like a man than I had in 10 years. And as it turned out, the reckoning wasn't just coming for the galaxy, it was coming for me too. The preparation didn't stop with telepathic resistance. For the next 6 hours, Vespera and her attendants, who I learned were called the Umbral Sages, put me through a diplomatic ringer that made my Earth Alliance training look like a kindergarten orientation. I was taught the intricate hand signals of the Meridian Council. I was taught how to recognize the subtle color shifts in the Crick's collective scales that indicated a lie. I was even taught how to drink a tea that was 90% neurotoxin without dying, just in case the hospitality turned lethal. But the most difficult part was the suit. Vespera had insisted on a custom-made set of umbral phase veil garments. It was a deep, midnight blue that seemed to ripple with every movement, as if it were made of liquid space. It wasn't just clothing, it was a biointerface. It was linked to my heart rate and my nervous system. If I got too nervous, the suit would turn a bright, screaming red. It's like a mood ring, I said, staring at my reflection in a dark matter mirror. But instead of showing if I'm happy, it shows everyone that I'm about to have a panic attack. It is a tool of transparency, one of the sages said, his voice like dry leaves. In the umbral courts, we do not hide our emotions, we master them. The suit shows that you have nothing to hide from the matriarch. I looked at Vespera, who was being fitted for her own ceremonial armor. She looked like a goddess of war, her skin glowing against the dark gold plating of her chest piece. Transparency is easy when you're a sovereign, I muttered. It's a bit harder when you're a guy whose primary defense mechanism is lying. Vespera turned to me. Then do not lie, Silas. Tell the truth. Even if it is a truth they do not want to hear. The truth is that I'm 3 light years out of my depth, I said. Then that is where we shall start, she replied. As the clock ticked toward the council meeting, Vespera took me to the highest point of the Shadow Enclave. It was a balcony that overlooked the central core of the celestial anchor. From here you could see the entire station, a massive, rotating city of light and steel, home to over 5 million beings from 1,000 different worlds. It is beautiful, isn't it? She asked, her voice low. All this diversity, all this life, balanced on the edge of a dead star. It's a miracle, I agreed, one that people spend a lot of time trying to break. Vespera sighed. My people have been the guardians of the Hu-Hong for 10,000 years. We have watched empires rise and fall like the tide. We have always stayed in the shadows, believing that isolation was our strength. But the shadows are growing cold, Silas. My people are fading. If we do not step into the light, we will disappear forever. Is that why you did it? I asked. Why you accepted the dance? Because you wanted to step into the light? She looked at me, her amber eyes searching mine. I did it because for 1 second, I saw a man who didn't care about empires or guardians. I saw a man who just wanted to be kind, and I realized that I had forgotten what kindness felt like. I didn't know what to say to that. I'm not used to being the reason a sovereign changes their entire foreign policy. It's a lot of pressure for a Tuesday. Before I could respond, the lead guard, the one who had folded me here, stepped onto the balcony. Matriarch, he said, bowing low. The Crick delegation has arrived at the council chamber. They are accompanied by the Meridian enforcers. They are demanding that the Vox be handed over for questioning regarding biological contamination. Vespera's expression hardened instantly. The blue of her suit turned a sharp, icy white. They move early. They hope to catch us off balance. I felt a surge of adrenaline. They want to question me? That's just a fancy word for kidnapping. They will not touch you, Vespera said, her voice dropping to a dangerous growl. We go now. We didn't take the fold this time. Vespera wanted to make an entrance. We took the grand lift, a transparent tube that ran through the center of the atrium. As we descended, the station seemed to hold its breath. Thousands of beings watched from the balconies as the Void Matriarch and her human Vox plummeted toward the heart of the station. I could see the Crick's delegates waiting at the bottom. They were massive, their scales a dull, aggressive green, their long tails twitching with agitation. They were flanked by the enforcers, droids in white and gold armor, who served as the council's police force. Silas, Vespera whispered as the lift slowed. Remember what I told you? Fear is a shadow. I reached down and felt the handle of the pistol under my suit. I'm okay, I said. I'm more worried about the suit turning red. The doors opened. The heat hit me first. The Cricks preferred a higher temperature than humans, and the area around the council chamber was like a sauna. The smell was even worse, sulfur and rotting meat. Liaison Thorne, one of the Cricks shouted, stepping forward. His name was Xylar, and he was the collective's chief negotiator. He had a scar running down his left eye that made him look like he was constantly snarling. You are in violation of Station Ordinance 12.4. You have engaged in unsanctioned biological contact with a sovereign entity. You must be quarantined immediately for the safety of the station. Vespera stepped in front of me, her presence like a wall of ice. He is the Vox of the umbral sovereignty, Xylar. He is under the shadow seal. If you touch him, you touch me. And if you touch me, the sovereignty will consider it an act of total war. Xylar hissed, his tongue flickering out to taste the air. The seal does not override council safety protocols, Matriarch. The human is a walking biohazard. He must be tested. I stepped out from behind Vespera. I felt the suit pulse, but it stayed a steady, deep blue. I've been tested, Xylar, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I've had my shots, I've had my scans, and I've even had a very uncomfortable physical last month. I'm as clean as a whistle, which is more than I can say for you. That sulfur smell is really doing a number on my sinuses. The crowd of onlookers gasped. No one spoke to a Crick's negotiator like that. They were known for their short tempers and their long memories. Xylar's scales turned a dark, angry purple. You dare insult the collective? You are a worm, Thorne, a soft, squishy primate who thinks a fancy suit makes him important. I'm not important, I said, taking a step toward him. That's the point. I'm just a guy. But even a guy like me knows when he's being bullied. You don't care about biohazards. You're just scared that the Umbral are finally talking to someone who isn't you. Xylar roared and lunged forward, his claws extended. I didn't move. I didn't reach for the gun. I just stood there. Vespera moved faster than I could see. She didn't strike him. She simply caught his wrist in midair. The sound of her hand hitting his scales was like a whip crack. The council chamber is neutral ground, Xylar, she said, her voice cold enough to freeze the air. If you spill blood here, your empire will be barred from the anchor for 1,000 years. Is that a price you're willing to pay? Xylar glared at her, his chest heaving. He slowly pulled his wrist back, his scales shifting back to green. This isn't over, Thorne, he hissed. The council will decide your fate. We will see, Vespera said. She turned to me and nodded. We entered the council chamber. It was a vast, circular room with a domed ceiling that displayed a real-time map of the 5 galaxies. The representatives of the 5 major powers sat in high, curved benches, looking down at the central dais. In the center of the dais stood the High Arbiter, an ancient being of the silvery race who looked like a tree that had learned how to wear a robe. Matriarch Vespera Thal, the Arbiter said, his voice deep and resonant. You have requested an emergency session to confirm the appointment of a Vox. I have, Vespera said, her voice echoing through the chamber. And you have chosen a human? The Arbiter asked, his wooden brow furrowing. A species that has only been part of the galactic community for 2 centuries? A species that is still fighting itself over borders and resources? I stepped forward onto the dais. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might actually trigger the suit's red alert. But I looked up at the Arbiter, and I thought of what Vespera had said about the blue of the Earth. "We're young," I said, my voice clear. "We're messy. We make a lot of mistakes. But we're also the only ones who are still willing to take a risk. Everyone else in this room is so buried in protocol and history that you've forgotten how to be alive. You've forgotten how to trust." There was a murmur from the benches. The Crix representative stood up. "Sincerity is not a qualification for the Council, Thorne. It is a weakness." "Maybe," I said, "but it's a weakness that kept the matriarch from being alone in a room full of people. And if it can do that, maybe it can keep us from starting a war over a dance." The Arbiter looked at me for a long time. Then he looked at Vespera. "The Vox has spoken," he said. "Now the Council will deliberate." We were led to a side room to wait. The air was thick with tension. Vespera sat on a stone bench, her head bowed. "You did well, Silas," she said. I slumped against the wall, the adrenaline fading and leaving me shaky. "I think I just insulted every major power in the universe. Kestrel is going to kill me. If I survive the Crix, I'm definitely not surviving her." Vespera looked up at me. "You are not a coward, Silas. You stood before the Council and told them the truth. That is more courage than most of my people have shown in a millennium." I looked at her. "Vespera, why me? Why did you really choose me? Out of all the people on this station, why did you let a guy like me into your life?" She stood up and walked over to me. She was so close I could see the swirling amber in her eyes. "Because," she whispered, "you were the only one who didn't look at my crown. You looked at me." Before I could respond, the door to the side room burst open. It wasn't an enforcer. It was Kestrel Vance, and she looked like she had just run a marathon through a war zone. "Silas," she gasped, grabbing my arm. "We have to go. Now." "What? What's happening?" "The Crix," she said, her voice shaking. "They've bypassed the Council. They've launched a boarding party. They're coming for you, Silas. They're going to take you, and they're going to blow the Shadow Enclave to hell." I looked at Vespera. Her eyes flared with a sudden, violent light. "They would dare?" she hissed. "They're already in the vents," Kestrel said. "We have maybe 5 minutes before they reach this level." I looked at the pistol in my waistband. I looked at the phase veil suit that was now turning a deep, dangerous purple. "Well," I said, taking a deep breath, "I guess the dance isn't over yet." Vespera reached out and grabbed my hand. Her touch was no longer cool. It was burning with a cold, dark energy. "Then let us show them," she said, her voice a promise of destruction. "What happens when you try to silence the voice of the void?" We didn't run for the exit. We ran deeper into the Council building, toward the private fold gate that Vespera had kept hidden. Behind us, I could hear the sound of explosions and the high-pitched shriek of Crix plasma rifles. My heart was racing, my lungs were burning, and I was pretty sure the suit was glowing like a supernova. But as I ran alongside the most powerful woman in the galaxy, I realized something. I wasn't scared because of the Crix. I was scared because for the first time in 10 years, I had something worth losing. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. We reached the fold gate just as the first Crix boarding party rounded the corner. They were huge, their armor covered in jagged spikes, their eyes glowing with a feral hunger. "Get him!" the leader roared, pointing a heavy plasma cannon at me. Vespera didn't even flinch. She raised her hand and the air around her began to scream. A wave of pure, dark energy erupted from her palm, hitting the Crix like a physical wall. They were thrown backward, their armor shattering, their weapons melting into slag. "Go!" she shouted, pulling me toward the vortex. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed Kestrel's hand and jumped. The sensation was even worse than before. It felt like my soul was being put through a meat grinder. I saw flashes of light, heard screams of ancient gods, and felt the cold, cold breath of the Wukong against my skin. And then, silence. I hit the floor of the Shadow Enclave with a bone-jarring thud. I rolled onto my back, gasping for air, my vision swimming with black spots. "Silas!" Kestrel's voice sounded muffled, like she was underwater. Silas, are you okay? I managed to sit up, my head spinning. I'm, I'm fine. Just remind me to never fly umbral air again. I looked around. We were in the audience chamber, but it looked different. The bioluminescent plants were glowing a deep, angry red. The shadows were moving on their own, swirling around the room like restless spirits. Vespera stepped out of the fold, her armor covered in a fine layer of dust. She looked at us, her expression grim. "The war has begun," she said. I looked at the pistol in my hand. I looked at Kestrel, who was already checking her comlink. "What do we do now?" I asked. Vespera walked over to the obsidian bench and picked up her crown. She held it for a moment, then placed it firmly back on her head. "Now," she said, her voice echoing with the power of 1,000 suns, "we fight." I stood up, my knees shaking, but my heart steady. "Then let's get to work," I said. "I've got a feeling this is going to be one hell of a story." The Shadow Enclave did not just go dark when the siege began. It went silent in a way that felt like a physical weight pressing against my eardrums. Outside, the celestial anchor was likely a chaotic mess of screaming sirens and emergency lights. But inside these light-eating walls, the world had become a vacuum. Vespera stood by the obsidian dais, her hand hovering over a pool of liquid silver that served as her tactical display. The red glow of the bioluminescent flora had deepened to a bruised, angry purple. Kestrel was huddled in the corner, her illegal kinetic pistol resting on her knee, her eyes darting between every shadow that moved. "Give me a sit rep, Vespera," I said, my voice sounding unnervingly thin in the silence. My suit was currently a shade of navy that suggested I was trying to be brave but failing at a molecular level. "The Cricks have bypassed the main life support conduits," Vespera replied, her voice lacking its usual melodic warmth. It was flat, cold, and efficient. "They are not here to occupy the Enclave, Silas. They are here to ghost it. They are venting the localized atmosphere and replacing it with a neuroparalytic gas tuned specifically to human physiology." I looked at Kestrel. She already had her tactical mask halfway on. "Silas," she muffled, tossing a spare filter toward me, "get this on. If you take one whiff of that Crick's cocktail, your nervous system will turn into a bowl of overcooked noodles." I caught the mask and strapped it over my face. The recycled air tasted like tin and old pennies. Great. So we're being gassed and hunted by lizard men who want to turn us into trophies. Just another Tuesday at the office. Vespera turned from the display. Her amber eyes were flashing with an intensity that made the hair on my arm stand up. "It is worse than that. My sages have detected the presence of the Mindstalkers. They are already at the threshold." Before I could ask what a Mindstalker actually did when it wasn't stalking minds, the doors to the audience chamber began to shimmer. It wasn't the clean, elegant dissolution of the umbral foldgate. It was a jagged, violent tearing. The air began to vibrate with a low-frequency hum that made my teeth ache. "Silas," Vesper said, her voice suddenly right in my ear, even though she was 5 meters away. "They will find the cracks in your soul. They will show you every moment you chose to stay in the shadows instead of standing in the sun. They will tell you that your fear is the only real thing about you." I felt a cold shiver crawl down my spine. "That's a lot of cracks to choose from," I muttered. The doors burst inward, not with an explosion of fire, but with an explosion of static. 3 figures stepped through the breach. They didn't look like the heavy-armored Crix warriors from the atrium. These were thin, elongated creatures dressed in robes of shimmering gray silk. They didn't have faces, just smooth, porcelain-like surfaces where eyes and mouths should be. "Mindstalkers," Kestrel hissed, raising her pistol. She fired 3 shots in rapid succession. The kinetic slugs hit the lead stalker's chest, but instead of blood or bone, the creature simply rippled like a reflection in a pond. The bullets passed through and buried themselves in the wall behind them. "Standard hardware won't touch them," Vespera shouted. "They exist in the spaces between seconds." I felt it then. The hum in the air intensified, turning into a scream that bypassed my ears and went straight for my brain. The chamber around me began to melt. The obsidian dais turned into the cockpit of an old Europa-class fighter. I could smell the ozone of a short-circuited console. I could see the glowing red target lock on a civilian transport ship, full of terrified families, hanging in the void of Jupiter's shadow. "Fire, Commander Thorne," a voice whispered. 1,000 voices, all sounding like the men I had served with. "It's an order. Clear the sector. Don't be a coward. Do your job." I clutched my head, falling to my knees. The suit on my body turned a brilliant, screaming red. It was so bright it was almost blinding. "No," I gasped. "I didn't fire. I ran." "Exactly," the voices hissed, and now they sounded like Ambassador Miller. "You ran. You've been running for 10 years. You're running now. You're using the matriarch as a shield because you're too small to stand on your own. You're a fraud, Silas. A pathetic, soft meatbag playing at being a hero." I felt a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't the cold psychic touch of the stalkers. It was warm. It was real. "Silas, look at me." I opened my eyes, struggling through the fog of the hallucination. Vespera was kneeling in front of me. She had discarded her tactical display and was holding my face in her hands. Her skin was glowing with a fierce, silver light, and where she touched me, the static seemed to burn away. "They are lying," she said, her amber eyes inches from mine. "You did not run because you were afraid of the battle. You ran because you were brave enough to value life over a medal." "That is not cowardice, Silas. That is the only kind of courage that matters." The voices shrieked, a high-pitched sound of frustration. The Mindstalkers drifted closer, their porcelain faces tilted in unison. The air around Vespera began to crackle with dark energy. She was shielding me, but I could see the strain on her face. Her phase veil was flickering wildly, turning from gold to black as she poured her own essence into the barrier. "Vespera, stop," I managed to say. "You're hurting yourself." "I am the matriarch," she whispered, her voice strained. "It is my burden to protect the voice." I looked at her, and in that moment, the humanistic theme we had been dancing around finally hit me like a freight train. She wasn't protecting me because I was an important political asset. She was protecting me because I was the only person who had treated her like a human being in 82 years. She was willing to burn herself out just to keep my mind from shattering. And I was sitting here, letting her do it because I was afraid of a few bad memories. "I am Silas Thorne," I said, the words feeling like solid stones in my mouth. I stood up, forcing my legs to lock. I reached out and took Vespera's hands, pulling them away from my face. The suit on my body shifted. The screaming red began to fade, replaced not by the navy of fear or the gold of honesty, but by a blinding, incandescent white. It was a color the sages hadn't mentioned. "I'm not a hero," I said, looking directly at the faceless stalkers. "And I'm definitely not a soldier anymore. But I'm done running. If you want into this mind, you're going to have to deal with all the mess I've kept inside. And trust me, it's not a pleasant place to be." I closed my eyes and did something I had spent a decade avoiding. I leaned into the fear. I opened the door to the memory of Europa, to the shame, to the loneliness of the last 10 years, and I threw it all at them. I didn't fight the static. I became the static. The scream in the room changed. It wasn't a psychic attack anymore. It was a psychic recoil. The Mindstalkers stumbled back, their gray robes fluttering as if caught in a gale. Their porcelain faces began to crack. "Humans are not built for logic," I shouted over the roar in my head. "We are built for contradictions. We love people who hurt us. We find hope in a vacuum. We are terrified and we do it anyway." The lead stalker let out a sound like breaking glass and evaporated into a cloud of gray dust. The other two followed a second later, their forms unable to process the sheer, messy chaos of human emotion I had unleashed. The chamber went silent. The heavy pressure vanished. I stood there, gasping for air, my heart hammering against my ribs at 120 beats per minute. The suit slowly settled into a soft, glowing silver. I looked down at Vespera. She was leaning against the dais, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She looked exhausted, but she was smiling. "You," she whispered, "you used your own brokenness as a shield." "It's the only thing I have a lot of," I said, offering her a shaky hand. She took it, and this time, I was the one anchoring her. Kestrel stood up from the corner, her pistol still raised but her expression one of utter disbelief. "Silas, did you just kill 3 psychic assassins by having a midlife crisis at them?" I wiped a smear of blood from my nose. It's a specialized technique, Kess. Don't try it at home. We don't have time for jokes, Vespera said, her voice regaining its strength as she stood up. The stalkers were just the first wave. The Cricks are using the confusion to reach the main reactor. If they overload the anchor's core, they won't just kill us. They'll take the entire station and 5 million people with it. Why? I asked. Why destroy the most important diplomatic hub in the galaxy just to kill a liaison in a matriarch? Because, Vesper said, looking at the silver tactical pool, they are not acting for the Crix Collective. They are acting for someone within my own sovereignty, someone who wants the Umbral to return to the ancient ways of conquest. The twist landed with a heavy thud. The Cricks weren't the masterminds. They were the hired muscle. Who? I asked. Vesper's gaze went cold. Lord Viler, my high commander. He was the one who advised me to go to the atrium. He was the one who knew the exact frequency of the gases to use against you. He wants to be the matriarch's successor, and he needs a war to pave his way to the throne. He's using me, I said, the realization clicking into place. If a human Vox is killed on Umbral ground and the anchor is destroyed, Earth will blame the Umbral. The Umbral will blame Earth, and Viler will step into the chaos as the savior of his people. Precisely, Vespera said. We have to get to the reactor, I said, checking the charge on the kinetic pistol Kestrel had given me. You cannot get there through the corridors, Vesper said. They are crawling with Crix kill teams. Then how? Vesper looked at the center of the chamber, where a single unlit lantern hung from the ceiling. We take the under anchor, the service tunnels built into the very skin of the station. It is a place of absolute darkness, Silas. Even for my people, it is a labyrinth of shadows. I looked at Kestrel. She looked at me. Darkness, I said. Well, at least the Crix won't be able to see us. Vespera reached out and touched the lantern. The floor beneath our feet didn't dissolve this time. It opened like a giant eye, revealing a vertical shaft that seemed to drop forever into the black heart of the station. I took a deep breath, adjusted my mask, and looked at the woman who had risked her soul to save mine. After you, matriarch, I said. She nodded once, and together we stepped into the abyss. The underanchor was not meant for living beings. It was a space designed for conduits, fiber optic bundles, and the massive gravity stabilizers that kept the station from spinning off into the nebula. The air was thick with the smell of scorched metal and the constant, rhythmic thrumming of the core, which felt like the heartbeat of a dying giant. We were moving in single file. Vesper was in the lead, her skin providing the only light in the oppressive gloom, a faint, ghostly silver that barely reached the walls. I was in the middle, and Kestrel brought up the rear, her pistol's tactical light sweeping back and forth across the jagged machinery. How far to the reactor? I whispered. Every sound seemed to bounce off the metal walls and return as a distorted ghost. 2 kilometers, Vespera replied. But in these tunnels, distance is a deceptive concept. We are moving against the rotation of the station. Suddenly, a metallic clang echoed from somewhere above us. We all froze. Kestrel cut her light instantly. Did you hear that? She breathed. It was rhythmic, I whispered, like boots on a grate. Vespera pressed her back against a cooling pipe. They have followed us into the skin. Valer's men. They know the under anchor as well as I do. We can't fight them in here, Kestrel said, her voice tight with professional concern. It's too narrow. 1 grenade and we're all fried. I looked at the maze of pipes around us. There was a junction about 10 meters ahead, 3 different tunnels branching off into the darkness. Split up? I suggested. No, Vespera said firmly. If we separate, we die. We stay together. We move faster now, our boots clattering against the metal floor. The sounds of pursuit were getting louder, a frantic, scraping noise that suggested something was moving through the vents with terrifying speed. It's not just soldiers, I said, looking up at the ceiling. I saw a flash of movement, something sleek and multi-limbed. Not Crix, not Umbral. Droids, Vespera hissed. Assassin bots. Valer's personal guard. The shadows above us erupted. 4 metallic shapes dropped from the ceiling, their limbs ending in white-hot plasma cutters. They were silent, efficient, and utterly lethal. Kestrel opened fire. The kinetic rounds sparked off the droids' reinforced carapaces. One of the machines lunged at her, its cutters narrowly missing her shoulder. She kicked it back, using the momentum to roll behind a thick cluster of cables. Vespera raised her hand, but the silver light was dim. She had spent too much of her energy shielding me from the Mindstalkers. A blast of dark energy caught one of the droids, shattering its sensory array, but the other three were closing in. "Silas, move!" Kestrel shouted. I didn't move, I couldn't. Not because I was frozen with fear, but because I was looking at the junction ahead. One of the tunnels led directly toward the reactor. The other two led toward the external venting systems. "If we keep running toward the reactor, we'll lead them straight to the core," I said. "They'll use us as the detonators." "Then what?" Vespera gasped, parrying a plasma blade with a shard of dark matter she had summoned from the air. I looked at the pistol in my hand. It was a human weapon, simple, crude, and kinetic. And then I looked at the massive cooling pipe running along the wall, labeled in 5 languages. High-pressure cryogenic fluid. "Do not pierce. Kess," I yelled. "Give me your spare mag." She didn't ask why. She tossed the magazine over the head of a lunging droid. I caught it, slammed it into the pistol, and turned toward the pipe. "Silas, what are you doing?" Vesper shouted. "I'm making a choice," I replied. I fired 6 rounds into the valve head of the cryogenic pipe. The metal groaned, then shrieked, and then the world disappeared in a cloud of sub-zero mist. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in half a second. The assassin bots, built for the controlled environment of the station, immediately began to malfunction as their lubricants froze and their sensors frosted over. "Move!" I grabbed Vespera's arm and pulled her toward the central tunnel. Kestrel was right behind us, her breath coming in visible plumes of white frost. We scrambled through the junction just as the entire corridor behind us turned into a solid block of ice. The droids were frozen mid-lunge, metallic statues in a graveyard of frozen nitrogen. "That," Kestrel panted, leaning against the wall once we were clear. "That was incredibly stupid. You could have cracked the station's hull." "But I didn't," I said, my teeth chattering. "I knew the specs. This sector is reinforced for deep space exposure." Vespera was looking at me, her expression a mix of shock and something else. "You risked your life on a calculation, Silas Thorne?" "I risked it on a choice," I said. "The hero vibe is still a work in progress, but I'm getting there." We continued our trek, the silence returning but feeling less heavy now. We were close. I could feel the vibration of the reactor in the soles of my boots, a deep, low-frequency thrum that made my skin tingle. We reached a massive circular hatch. This was the entrance to the reactor core. Vespera stepped forward to input the code, but the console was already glowing red. "Override," she whispered. "Valor is already inside." I looked at Kestrel. She checked her pistol. 7 rounds left. I had 4. "Vespera," I said, "if we go in there, there's no turning back. Miller disowned me. Earth won't back us. If we die, we're just footnotes in a history book written by the winner." She looked at the hatch, and then she looked at me. The amber in her eyes was steady now. It wasn't the light of a sovereign. It was the light of a woman who had found something worth fighting for. "I have spent my life being a footnote in the history of my ancestors," she said. "I would rather be a single honest sentence in yours." I smiled. "Well said. Let's go make some history." The hatch slid open. The reactor core was a cathedral of light. In the center, a column of pure white energy rose from the floor and disappeared into the ceiling, the harnessed power of the dead neutron star. Around the column, a series of walkways and platforms hovered in the air, connected by bridges of solid light. And standing on the central platform, his hand resting on the emergency purge lever, was Lord Valor. He was taller than Vespera, his skin a darker, more metallic gray. His armor was ceremonial, gold and black, and he held a long staff made of dark matter that hummed with power. "My matriarch," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You have finally arrived, and you brought the human. How poetic. You have betrayed everything the Umbrals stand for, Valor," Vespera said, her voice ringing out like a bell. "You would murder millions for a title. I would save billions from obscurity," Viler shouted, his eyes flashing with a fanatical light. We are the sovereignty. We are the masters of the void. And yet we sit on this station like beggars, trading our secrets for oxygen and blue water. If this station falls, the galaxy will remember who we are. They will fear the night again. Fear is not respect, Valer, I said, stepping onto the walkway. I know a thing or two about being scared. It doesn't make you strong, it just makes you loud. Valer sneered at me. The Vox, the little primate who thinks a dance can change the universe? Do you know what happens when I pull this lever, human? The core will vent into the station. The resulting shock wave will shatter every window on the anchor. The atmosphere will be gone in 3 minutes. And you'll be dead too, I said. A small price to pay for immortality, he replied. Vespera moved, a blur of silver light, but Viler was ready. He swung his staff, and a wave of dark energy sent her crashing into the railing. Kestrel raised her gun, but 2 Crick snipers appeared on the upper walkways, their plasma beams pinning her down behind a reactor shield. I was the only one left with a clear line of sight. I raised my pistol. My hand was shaking. The suit on my body was flickering between silver and red. Drop the staff, Valer, I said. You won't shoot Silas Thorne, Valer said, his voice mocking. You are the man who refused to fire on Europa. You are the man who values life too much to take it. You are a coward at your very core. He was right. That was the choice that had defined my life. That was the crack the Mindstalkers had tried to exploit. But as I looked at Viler, I realized that the lesson wasn't about whether I was a killer or a coward. It was about what I was willing to stand for. I'm not a soldier anymore, I said, my voice quiet but steady. I'm a liaison, and my job is to make sure people understand each other. I didn't point the gun at Valer. I pointed it at the stabilizer array directly above the energy column. If I shoot that, I said, the core won't vent. It will collapse. The gravity will invert, and we'll all be crushed into a singularity the size of a marble. But the station will stay intact. The 5 million people outside this room will live. Valer's expression faltered. You're bluffing. You'd kill yourself? I looked at Vespera. She was watching me, her eyes full of a strange, peaceful understanding. She wasn't telling me to stop. She was waiting for my choice. I'm acting despite the fear, I said. Isn't that what you told me, Vespera? I squeezed the trigger. The bullet didn't hit the array. It hit the staff of shadows in Valer's hand. The kinetic force of the heavy slug, combined with the unstable energy of the staff, caused a localized explosion. Valer was thrown backward, away from the lever. The staff shattered into 1,000 pieces of dark matter, which immediately began to dissolve. Vespera didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, catching Viler before he could recover, and slammed him against the central pillar. It is over, Viler, she said, her voice like a death sentence. The Crick snipers, seeing their employer defeated, vanished into the shadows of the upper levels. Kestrel stood up, her face pale but her eyes fierce. Silas, she breathed. You actually hit it. I lowered the gun, my hands finally stopping their shake. I'm a pilot, Kess. We're good at hitting small targets at high speeds. Vespera turned to me, still holding Valer by the throat. You did not fire on the array, she said. I didn't want to kill 5 million people, Vespera. And I didn't want to kill us. I wanted to give us a chance to keep talking. She let out a breath, a sound that was half laugh and half sob. She released Viler, who slumped to the floor, his eyes vacant. The loss of his staff had seemingly broken his connection to the void. The reactor settled back into its rhythmic hum. The white light softened. We stood there in the center of the station's heart, a human pilot, a galactic security officer, and the matriarch of the night. Kestrel's comlink chirped. Shh. It was the Earth Embassy. Liaison Thorne. Liaison Thorne, do you copy? This is Ambassador Miller. We've received the data burst from the matriarch sages. We know about Valer. We know what you did. I looked at the console. Tell him I'm on administrative leave, I said. There was a long pause on the other end. Silas, Miller's voice came back, sounding uncharacteristically small. The council is convening. They want to hear from the Vox. They want to talk peace. I looked at Vespera. She was standing by the energy column, her phase veil glowing a soft, warm gold. "What do you think, matriarch?" I asked. "Should we tell them the truth?" Vespra walked over to me and took my hand. This time she didn't just hold it. She interlaced her fingers with mine. "Yes," she said. "Let us tell them that the darkness is over, and the dance is just beginning." The air in the grand atrium usually smelled of high-end air filters and the expensive perfumes of 5 different galaxies. Now it smelled of ozone, burnt plastic, and the metallic tang of dried blood. The glass viewports were still intact, thank the stars, but the lanterns that usually drifted like glowing jellyfish were shattered, their bioluminescent fluid dripping down the walls in glowing, sickly streaks. I walked through the debris with Vespra and Kestrel, the silence of the room punctuated only by the occasional spark of a shorted-out circuit. My phase veil suit had settled into a dull, exhausted gray, reflecting exactly how I felt. I was a professional maker of bad decisions, and I had just reached my quota for the next 3 decades. "Silas," Kestrel whispered, her hand still white-knuckled on her pistol. "Look at the monitors." The holographic displays were flickering back to life. Instead of the Meridian Council's crest, they showed a scrolling list of casualties and damage reports. The boarding party had been pushed back, but the cost was etched into the faces of the survivors, huddled in the corners of the room. I saw Earth Alliance staff, Crix merchants, and Umbral sages all sitting together, unified by the simple, terrifying fact that they were still breathing. Ambassador Miller was standing near the Earth delegation's table, looking like he had aged 10 years in the last 2 hours. His wig was slightly askew, and for once, he didn't look like he was preparing a speech. He looked like he was about to vomit. "Thorne," he said, his voice cracking as we approached. You're alive." I managed a grimace that felt like a smile. "Sorry to disappoint, Mr. Ambassador. I'm like a bad penny. I just keep turning up." He didn't snap back at me. He didn't mention administrative leave or Earth's disavowal. He just looked at Vespra and bowed his head, a genuine, clumsy gesture of respect. "Matriarch, we have received the logs from the reactor. We know what Valor tried to do. We know what this man did." Vespra stood tall, her ceremonial armor scratched and dulled by the fighting, but her presence was still a gravity well that drew every eye in the room. "He did what a Vox is meant to do, Miller. He spoke for those who could not. He chose a path that did not end in a massacre." I felt a flush of heat in my neck. I wasn't used to being the subject of a sovereign's praise, especially when I felt like I was about 2 seconds away from a total nervous collapse. "We need to get to the medical bay," I said, trying to deflect the attention. "Vespra is drained, and Kestrel's got a shoulder that's going to be a problem if we don't fix it." "There is no time for the medical bay," a new voice boomed. I turned to see the High Arbiter, the tree-like Silvari, stepping out from a cluster of guards. His wooden skin was charred in places, and several of his branch-like fingers were broken. "The Crix have not retreated to the neutral zone, Liaison Thorne. They have regrouped at the station's exterior ring. They have tethered a gravity mine to the neutron star's containment field." My stomach dropped into my boots. A gravity mine. If that thing detonated, it wouldn't just blow up the station, it would destabilize the neutron star. The resulting explosion would wipe out every planet within 10 light years. "Why?" I asked, the word sounding like a croak. "Valor is down. The coup is over." "The Crix Collective is a beast with many heads," the Arbiter replied. "The faction that supported Valor cannot afford to leave witnesses or a failed record. They want to sanitize the sector. If the station and the star go, there is no evidence of their involvement, just a tragic interstellar accident." Vespra turned to me, her amber eyes wide with a realization that mirrored my own. "Silas, the mine is located on the external maintenance walkway, Sector 42. It is protected by a localized jamming field. We cannot disarm it remotely." I looked at my hands. They were still shaking. "I'm a pilot," I whispered. "I know how to fly. I don't know how to disarm a Crix gravity mine in a vacuum." "But you know the station's skin," Kestrel said, stepping forward. She winced as she moved her arm, but her gaze was fierce. "You spent 3 years as a structural inspector before you became a liaison. You know the access points." I looked at the monitor. Sector 42 was on the far side of the station, exposed to the raw radiation of the nebula. It was a suicide mission. "I'll go," Vespera said, her voice steady. "My people can navigate the void without suits for short periods. I can use the umbral energy to shield the mind sensors." "No," I said, the word coming out before I could think. "You're empty, Vespera. You poured everything you had into saving my mind from the stalkers. If you go out there now, the radiation will cook you before you reach the first airlock." "I have to try," she said, her fingers grazing my wrist. "I am the matriarch. My life is for my people." "And I'm the Vox," I said, standing as straight as my trembling legs would allow. "Which means I get to tell the matriarch when she's being a stubborn idiot." A few of the Earth staff gasped, but Vespera just stared at me, her eyes flickering with a mix of anger and something that looked like relief. "I know the walkway," I continued. "I know where the manual override for the containment field is. If I can get to the mine, I can trigger a localized dampening field from my suit's phase veil. It might be enough to hold the detonation long enough for the station's security to vent the sector." "Silas," Kestrel said, her voice dropping, "you don't have a vacuum-rated suit. Your phase veil is diplomatic grade. It won't hold the pressure for more than 10 minutes. 10 minutes is plenty," I said, though I felt like I was lying to myself. "I've had shorter dates." I looked at Ambassador Miller. "I need a kinetic cutter and a patch kit, and I need someone to tell the Cricks that if they don't back off, I'm going to make sure their names are the first thing the survivors hear when the rescue ships arrive." Miller nodded, his face grim. "I'll handle the communications, Thorne. Go. And for the love of Earth, be careful." Vespera walked with me toward the airlock. The rest of the atrium faded into a blur of gray and gold. As we reached the inner door, she stopped and turned me to face her. "You are acting despite the fear again," she said. "It's becoming a bad habit," I admitted. She reached up and touched my face. "In the umbral culture, there is a saying, the stars are only visible because of the dark. You are the light that made me see the stars again, Silas. Do not let it go out." I leaned into her hand for a second, soaking in the warmth. "I'll be back, Vespera. We haven't finished our dance." She nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I will be waiting." The airlock hissed shut. The silence that followed was absolute. I stood in the small, cramped space and began the process of sealing my diplomatic suit. It was a joke of a vacuum seal, a thin layer of biofilm that was meant to protect me from a spilled drink, not the freezing void of deep space. I checked my gear. 1 kinetic cutter, 1 patch kit, 1 emergency oxygen canister. "I'm about to walk out onto the skin of a station tethered to a dying star," I whispered to myself. "I'm a coward. I'm a runner. I'm a guy who likes bad gin and boring parties." But as the outer door began to slide open, revealing the terrifying, beautiful vastness of the nebula, I realized that I wasn't running. I was stepping forward. The pressure change was immediate. My suit groaned, the phase veil tightening against my skin until it felt like I was being wrapped in plastic. The sound of my own breath was a deafening roar in my ears. 1 step. My magnetized boots clicked against the hull. The vibration traveled through my legs, a rhythmic hum that reminded me the station was still alive. Beneath me, the neutron star was a pulsing white eye, its gravity pulling at the very atoms of my body. Sector 42 was 500 meters away. I started to move. The walkway was a narrow strip of metal, battered by micrometeorites and radiation. To my left was the station's massive hull, a wall of steel that felt like a mountain. To my right was the big dark. I didn't look right. I focused on the glowing amber lights of the maintenance markers. 400 meters. My suit's display flickered. Integrity at 95%. Radiation levels elevated. I could see the mine now. It was a jagged, black shape clamped onto the containment stabilizer. It looked like a parasite, a tick sucking the life out of the station. 2 Crix droids, small, spider-like things, were crawling over it, their sensory arrays glowing a menacing red. "Crate," I muttered, the words sounding metallic and strange in my helmet. They left guards. I reached for my kinetic cutter. It wasn't a weapon, but at this range, it would do the trick. I moved as quietly as my magnetized boots would allow. The droids were focused on the mine, their spindly legs tapping against the hull in a way that made my skin crawl. 300 meters. Suddenly, a massive flare of energy erupted from the neutron star. The station shuddered, and the walkway beneath me buckled. I lost my footing, my boots losing their magnetic grip for a terrifying second. I was drifting. I clawed at the air, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could see the nebula swirling around me, a sea of purple and gold. I was going to die. I was going to float into the dark and become a frozen statue. Silas, focus. Vespera's voice rang in my head, a psychic tether that pulled me back from the brink of panic. You are not the dark. You are the light. I reached out and grabbed a protruding cooling pipe. The metal was freezing, the cold biting through my suit's thin gloves. I hauled myself back toward the walkway, my breath coming in jagged gasps. My suit's display was screaming now. Integrity at 80%. Oxygen levels, 7 minutes. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I reached the mine and didn't give the droids a chance to react. I swung the kinetic cutter, the blade of high-frequency energy slicing through the first Spiderbot's central processor. It sparked and drifted away into the void. The second droid lunged at me, its cutter snapping at my faceplate. I ducked, feeling the heat of its blades against my suit. I grabbed one of its legs and pulled, using the momentum to slam it against the mine's casing. It shattered into a dozen pieces of scrap metal. I was alone with the mine. It was a Crix Model 7 gravity disruptor. I had seen them in briefing files, usually under the heading, "Do not approach." I looked at the timer. 2 minutes. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the cutter. My vision was starting to blur from the radiation. I thought of Europa. I thought of the transport ship I hadn't fired on. I realized that my whole life had been leading to this moment. All the running, all the hiding, all the fear. It wasn't a cage. It was a forge. I wasn't a hero because I wasn't afraid. I was a hero because I was terrified out of my mind, and I was doing it anyway. I reached for the mine's control panel. I have to be honest, I whispered. I really, really don't want to die. I triggered the phase veil's dampening field. The suit on my body began to glow a blinding, incandescent white. The energy was being drained directly from my suit's life support, but I didn't care. I poured everything into the mine. My thoughts focused on the people in the atrium, on Kestrel, and on the woman who was waiting for me. The timer on the mine slowed. It flickered. 1 minute. 50 seconds. The gravity mine began to hum, a low, vibrating sound that I could feel in my teeth. The dampening field was working, but it was failing. My suit was tearing at the seams. Integrity at 40%. Oxygen depleted. Emergency reserve active. I grabbed the patch kit and slammed it onto the mine's primary detonator, hoping the chemical seal would gum up the works long enough for the station's security to vent the sector. Then I did the only thing a pilot knows how to do. I kicked off. I pushed away from the mine with every ounce of strength in my legs. I drifted backward, watching the black shape of the disruptor grow smaller and smaller. 30 seconds, 20 seconds. A massive blast of white light erupted from the maintenance walkway. The dampening field had failed, but the patch kit had worked. The explosion was localized. Instead of destabilizing the star, the mine's energy was vented outward into the nebula. The shockwave hit me like a physical wall. I felt my ribs crack as I was tossed through the void. My suit's faceplate shattered, a spider web of cracks appearing in front of my eyes. I was drifting again, but this time I wasn't scared. The nebula was beautiful. It looked like the ocean back on Earth, deep and full of life. I saw a spark of light in the distance, the airlock opening. I closed my eyes. I had done it. I had stopped the dark. And then I felt a hand grab my collar. Silas, it was Kestrel. She was in a full combat vacuum suit, her eyes wide behind her visor. She hauled me back into the airlock, slamming the door shut and triggering the repressurization cycle. The air rushed back in, but I couldn't breathe. My lungs felt like they were full of broken glass. I saw Vespera's face through the inner door's window. She was screaming my name, her hands pressed against the glass. I managed a weak, bloody grin. "Told you," I whispered, before the world finally, mercifully, went black. The medical bay of the celestial anchor was a place of sterile white lights and the constant, rhythmic beep of biomonitors. It was a sound I had grown to hate over the years, but today it was the most beautiful music in the galaxy. It meant I was still alive. I opened my eyes, my vision blurry, and my head feeling like it had been used as a target for a Crick's plasma cannon. Every inch of my body ached with a deep, throbbing pain that made it difficult to breathe. How long? I wheezed, the words sounding like a rasp. 24 hours, a voice replied. I turned my head slowly. Vespera was sitting in a chair beside my bed. She had discarded her ceremonial armor and was wearing a simple robe of gray silk. Her amber eyes were red-rimmed and her skin looked pale. But when she saw me, her entire face transformed. Silas, she breathed, reaching out to take my hand. I felt her cool fingers against mine, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely safe. Did we win? I asked. The mine was neutralized, she said. The Crick's fleet has retreated to their own territory. The Meridian Council has officially recognized Earth as a strategic partner of the Umbral sovereignty, and Lord Vaylor is being held in a containment cell in the high-security wing. I let out a breath that was half laugh and half sob. So I'm not fired? Ambassador Miller wanted to give you a medal, Vespera said, her voice brimming with a rare, playful warmth. But I told him that you would probably prefer a bottle of high-quality gin and a week of uninterrupted sleep. She's a keeper, I muttered, looking at Vespera. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the steady hum of the medical equipment. The weight of the last few days was still heavy on my chest, but it was a different kind of weight now. It wasn't the weight of fear or shame. It was the weight of a life that finally had a purpose. Silas, Vespera said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Why did you do it? You knew the odds. You knew the suit wouldn't hold. You could have stayed in the airlock. I looked at the ceiling. I spent 10 years running from a ghost, Vespera. I thought that if I stayed in the shadows, I'd be safe. But safety is just another kind of cage. I realized that if I didn't walk out onto that hull, I'd be a coward for the rest of my life. And I'm tired of being a coward. Vespera squeezed my hand. You were never a coward. You were just a man waiting for a reason to stand. I looked at her, and the humanistic theme we had been building finally felt complete. Courage isn't something you're born with, I said. It's something you choose, every single day. And sometimes you have to choose it when you're at your weakest. The door to the medical bay hissed open, and Kestrel Vance stepped inside. Her arm was in a sling, and she had a bandage over her eye, but she looked like she had just won a war. Hey, hero, she said, her voice cracking. Glad to see you're not a frozen popsicle. Kess, I said, managing a weak smile. Thanks for the save. I owe you one. You owe me 100, she replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. But I'll settle for a drink when we get back to Earth. Earth, I whispered. Are we going back? Ambassador Miller has requested a full debriefing at the Geneva headquarters, Kestrel said, but the matriarch has invited you to spend some time in the Shadow Enclave first, for cultural exchange purposes. I looked at Vespera. She was watching me, her expression full of a quiet hope. I'd like that, I said. Kestrel nodded, then looked at Vespera. We've got some work to do, matriarch. The Cricks aren't going to go away just because one mine failed. We need to build a real alliance, not just a dance. Vespera stood up, her posture regal once more. I agree, Commander Vance. The Night Regent is ready to speak, and this time the galaxy will listen. Kestrel left us alone again. I felt the fatigue beginning to pull at me, a heavy, warm blanket of exhaustion. Silas, Vespera said, leaning over to kiss my forehead. Her lips were cool, but they left a trail of fire in their wake. Sleep now. You have earned your rest. I closed my eyes, the sound of her voice drifting me towards sleep. But before I went under, I had one more question. Vespera? Yes, Silas. The dance, I whispered. Did I ever tell you that I actually enjoyed it? I saw her smile in the darkness behind my eyelids. I knew, Silas. I knew the moment you stepped into my circle. I drifted off into a dreamless sleep, knowing that when I woke up, the world would be different. The shadows were still there, and the war was far from over. But I wasn't running anymore. I was walking, and I wasn't walking alone. The next few days were a blur of recovery and high-level meetings. I was moved from the medical bay to a private suite in the Shadow Enclave, where the air was cool and the lights were low. Vespera was a constant presence, sometimes sitting with me in silence, sometimes talking about the history of her people. I learned about the first silence, when the Umbral were driven from their homeworld. I learned about the vow of isolation and how it had protected them from the wars of the five galaxies. And I learned about Vespera's own fears, the fear of failing her people and the fear of being the last of her line. One evening, as we sat on the balcony overlooking the dead star, I asked her about the future. "What happens now?" I asked. "The Council is watching us, the Cricks are plotting, and Earth is terrified." Vespera looked out at the nebula, the purple and gold light reflecting in her amber eyes. "We build a bridge, Silas, a bridge between the light and the dark. It will be difficult, it will be dangerous, but as you showed me, it is the only way to survive." She turned to me, her hand resting on my arm. "And you, Silas Thorne, what will you do?" I thought about it for a long time. I thought about the cockpit of my old fighter. I thought about the atrium, and I thought about the man I had become in the last 48 hours. "I'm the Vox," I said. "I guess my job is to keep talking, to make sure people see the person behind the mask, whether it's a crown of dark matter or a cheap diplomatic suit." Vesper smiled, a genuine, beautiful sound. "Then we have a lot of work to do." She stood up and held out her hand. "Would you like to dance, Silas Thorne?" I looked at her hand, and then I looked at the stars. My heart was steady. My fear was still there, but it was just a shadow now, a part of the landscape rather than the map. I stood up, ignoring the ache in my ribs, and took her hand. "I'd love to," I said, "but this time, I'm leading." We moved in a slow, graceful circle on the balcony, suspended between the station and the void. There was no music, no audience, and no political agenda. There was just the cool weight of her hand in mine, and the steady beat of our hearts. We were a human and an umbral, a pilot and a queen, a coward and a hero. We were a story that was just beginning, and as we danced in the heart of the galaxy, I realized that the greatest adventure isn't found in the stars. It's found in the moment you decide to stop running and finally, truly, see the person standing right in front of you. The weight of the promise I had made to Vespera felt light now, like a star chart guiding me home. And for the first time in 10 years, I knew exactly where I was going. I was walking into the light, and I was taking the darkness with me. The station continued its slow, patient rotation. The neutron star pulsed in the deep, and in a corner of the universe that everyone had forgotten, two people continued to move in perfect synchronicity, proving that even in a vacuum, kindness can still breathe. "I am Silas Thorne," I whispered to the night, "and I am no longer afraid." The Meridian Council chamber was a theater of light and judgment, but today it felt more like a courtroom where the verdict had already been written in the stars. The air was thick with the scent of sanitizing agents and the faint metallic tang of the station's recycled atmosphere. I stood on the central dais, my legs still feeling like they were made of damp cardboard, wearing a new suit of phase veil that Vespera's sages had prepared. It was a deep, steady silver, the color of a calm sea before dawn. To my left, Vespera Thal stood with her head held high, the dark matter crown resting on her brow like a promise kept. To my right, Kestrel Vance stood in her dress blues, her arms still in a sleek carbon fiber sling, looking like she was ready to punch anyone who dared to breathe incorrectly. "High Arbiter," the Crix representative hissed, his scales a sickly, mottled gray. "We protest this entire proceeding. The human, Silas Thorne, is a known deserter. His testimony is tainted by his history of instability. The events at the reactor were a staged provocation by the Umbral to justify their expansion." I felt the old familiar itch of fear crawling up my spine, the urge to look for the nearest exit and just bug out. My heart started to hammer, a rhythmic thrumming that threatened to turn my silver suit into a panicked red. I looked at the Crix negotiator, Xylar, who was watching me with a predatory grin. He wanted me to flinch. He wanted me to be the coward everyone said I was. I took a breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs. I looked at Vespera. She didn't say a word, but her amber eyes were fixed on mine, holding me steady in the storm. "Mr. Ambassador," I said, my voice echoing through the chamber. It wasn't the voice of a diplomat or a soldier. It was just me, Silas. I turned to face the semicircle of galactic leaders. You're right about one thing, Xylar. I did run. 10 years ago, over Europa, I saw a choice between following an order and saving lives. I chose the lives, and for 10 years I've let people like you tell me that made me a coward. I've lived in the shadows because I was afraid of the light. The chamber went silent. Even the arbiter leaned forward, his wooden face creased with interest. But then I met the matriarch, I continued, gesturing to Vespera. I saw someone who was a prisoner of her own power, someone who was being used as a symbol while her own people were being led into a war they didn't want. And I realized that the greatest fear isn't dying. It's living a life that doesn't mean anything. It's staying silent when you have a voice. I stepped closer to the edge of the dais, looking directly at the Earth delegation. Ambassador Miller sat there, his face unreadable, but his eyes were locked on mine. We're all scared, I said. The Cricks are scared of losing their influence. The Umbral are scared of disappearing. Earth is scared of being caught in the middle. But fear isn't a policy, it's a cage. And if we don't start being honest with each other, we're going to burn this whole station down just to prove who's the toughest kid on the block. The Cricks representative opened his mouth to retort, but the High Arbiter raised a massive, gnarled hand. Enough, the Arbiter boomed. The logs from the reactor have been verified by 3 independent intelligence cores. The gravity mine was of Crick's manufacture, and the transmission codes used to bypass the anchor's security originated from the office of Lord Viler. These are facts. He looked down at me, his eyes like ancient embers. Liaison Thorne, you were disowned by your own government 48 hours ago. You stood on the hull of this station with nothing but a diplomatic suit and a kinetic cutter. Why? I didn't have to think about it. Because someone had to, I said. And because I promised the matriarch a second dance. A ripple of low-frequency murmurs moved through the room. I saw a few of the sages bow their heads, and even Kestrel managed a small, lopsided smile. The High Arbiter turned to the rest of the council. The Umbral sovereignty has petitioned for a new status within the Meridian Accord. They no longer seek isolation. They seek a partnership, with Earth as their primary cultural and diplomatic link. Ambassador Miller stood up then, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. High Arbiter, the Earth Alliance. We have reconsidered our position. Silas Thorne is not a deserter. He is a hero. And if he says that the Umbral are our allies, then the Earth Alliance stands with him. I felt a lump in my throat that I couldn't swallow. I looked at Kestrel, who gave me a sharp professional nod that said, I told you so. The judgment was swift. Lord Viler was to be exiled to the outer reaches of the Hu-Hong, and the Cricks Collective was ordered to pay massive reparations for the damage to the anchor. But more importantly, the Shadow Seal was formalized. It wasn't a military treaty, it was a sincerity accord, a promise of transparency between the 2 most different species in the galaxy. As we walked out of the chamber, the crowd of diplomats and reporters parted like water. I felt like I was walking on air, the adrenaline finally fading and leaving me with a deep, peaceful exhaustion. We reached the observation gallery where the view of the nebula was unobstructed. The purple and gold gases were swirling in a slow, eternal dance, a reminder that the universe was much bigger than our petty wars. Silas, Vespera said, stepping up beside me. She looked tired, her glow dimmed, but her eyes were bright. Yeah? You did not use your suit to hide today, she said, her hand grazing mine. You stayed silver the entire time. I looked down at my sleeves. I guess I didn't have anything to hide, I said. Kestrel appeared behind us, her sling adjusted, and a fresh data slate in her hand. Sorry to break up the moment, but we've got a dozen interviews lined up, and the premiere wants a direct link in 1 hour. Silas, you're officially the most famous human in the sector. Try not to let it go to your head. Too late, I joked. I'm already planning my autobiography. How to save the galaxy while terrified out of your mind. Kestrel snorted. Just make sure you get my good side in the hollows. She turned and walked toward the communications array, her step lighter than I'd seen it in weeks. I looked at Vespera. She was staring at the stars the same way she had been when I first saw her. But she wasn't alone anymore. "What now, Vespera?" I asked. "Now," she said, turning to me with a smile that could have lit up a dead star. "We go to Earth. I want to see this blue planet of yours, and I want to see if your gin is really as bad as you say it is." I laughed, a real deep sound that felt like it was healing the cracks in my ribs. "It's worse, Vespera. It's much, much worse." I took her hand, interlacing my fingers with hers. We walked through the corridors of the Anchor, heading toward the Earth shuttle bay. People still watched us, but the looks weren't full of fear anymore. They were full of curiosity. We had broken the silence. We had stepped out of the shadows. And as we reached the docking port, I realized that the reckoning hadn't been a destruction. It had been a beginning. I looked back at the grand atrium one last time. The lanterns were being relit, their soft amber glow filling the room. The station was healing. We were all healing. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for an exit. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. 1 week later, the Earth Alliance shuttle Pathfinder was gliding through the upper atmosphere of Earth. From the viewing deck, the planet was a breathtaking marble of sapphire and emerald, wrapped in wisps of white cloud. It looked impossibly fragile from up here, a tiny speck of life in the vast, cold dark. I stood at the window, wearing a simple civilian suit. No phase veil, no mood-sensing fibers, just cotton and wool. It felt heavy and honest. Beside me, Vesper was staring down at the surface, her eyes wide with a wonder that made her look like a child. She had insisted on coming in a standard diplomatic robe, wanting to experience Earth as a guest, not a sovereign. "It is so vibrant," she whispered. "The light here is different. It's warm." "It's home," I said. Kestrel was sitting at a nearby terminal, finishing up a final sit rep for the Geneva brass. "Silas, we're landing at the Mediterranean spaceport in 30 minutes. The crowds are already gathering. There are over 200,000 people waiting at the gates." I winced. 200,000? Maybe we should just loop around and go back to the Anchor. "I'm not great with crowds, Kess." Kestrel looked up, her expression softening into a genuine smile. "You'll be fine, Silas. Just tell them the truth." It worked for the council. The shuttle banked, and the sun hit the windows, flooding the cabin with a bright, golden light. I felt the heat on my face, a real, natural heat that no station heater could ever replicate. We landed with a soft thud. The ramp hissed open, and the air of Earth rushed in, smelling of salt water, dry grass, and the faint, sweet scent of blooming jasmine. It was overwhelming. I took a deep breath, feeling the humidity settle in my lungs like a warm hug. Vespera stepped onto the ramp first. The crowd went silent for a heartbeat, and then a roar of sound erupted that was louder than any reactor vent. It wasn't a roar of anger, it was a roar of welcome. I followed her down, my boots hitting the solid ground of my homeworld. I felt the gravity pulling at me, the real, honest weight of the planet. I didn't feel like a runner anymore. I felt like I had finally reached the finish line. We walked through the terminal, flanked by a phalanx of Earth security and umbral sages. People were reaching out, trying to touch Vespera's robe, but she didn't flinch. She smiled at them, her amber eyes glowing with a soft, steady light. We reached the podium in the center of the plaza. Every camera in the world was trained on us. Millions of people were watching through their screens, waiting for the Vox to speak. I stepped up to the microphone. My heart was thumping, but it was a steady, rhythmic beat. I looked out at the sea of faces, people of every color, every age, every background. They were all there, unified by a single moment of shared history. 10 years ago, I began, my voice clear and unwavering. I made a choice. I thought it was the end of my story. I thought I had failed the only thing that mattered, my duty. I spent a long time hiding from that choice, living in the spaces between words, afraid that if anyone really saw me, they'd see a coward. I looked at Vespera, who was standing just a few feet away, her hand resting on the railing. "But I was wrong," I said. "Courage isn't about being perfect. It isn't about never being afraid. It's about what you do when the dark is closing in. It's about the moment you decide that someone else's life is more important than your own safety. It's about the sincerity of a single dance in a room full of protocol. I paused, looking at the sky. The sun was beginning to set, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink. The umbral sovereignty and the Earth Alliance are very different, I continued. We speak different languages, we breathe different air, and we see the universe through different eyes. But we share the same heart. We share the same fear of being alone. And today we've decided that we don't have to be. I stepped back, and Vesper took my place at the microphone. She didn't use a translator. She spoke in her own resonant, melodic voice, the vibrations carrying across the plaza like a song. We have spent 10,000 years in the night, she said. We thought the dark was our shield, but Silas Thorne showed us that the dark is only a place where we wait for the light. We are no longer the sovereignty of the void. We are the sovereignty of the morning. The crowd erupted again, a sound so pure and joyous that it made my eyes sting. After the ceremony, we were whisked away to a private villa overlooking the sea. Kestrel and the sages stayed behind to handle the logistical nightmare of a new embassy, leaving Vesper and me alone for the first time since we had left the anchor. We stood on the terrace, watching the moon rise over the water. The silver light danced on the waves, a mirrored image of the nebula we had left behind. "I'm tired, Silas," Vesper said, leaning her head on my shoulder. "Me too, Vespera. Me too." She looked out at the ocean. "Is it true what you said? That you were a runner?" I nodded. I was, but I think I've finally run out of places to go. Vesper turned to me, her face illuminated by the moonlight. "You did not run to Earth, Silas. You came home, and you brought me with you." I looked at her, and in that moment, I realized the magnitude of what we had done. We hadn't just saved a station, we had saved ourselves. I had found my courage in her loneliness, and she had found her voice in my fear. I spent a lifetime thinking that the cracks in my soul were flaws, holes where the strength had leaked out. I thought that Europa was my defining failure, a mark of shame that I had to carry until the day I stopped breathing. I lived like a ghost because I didn't think I was worthy of the sun. But standing here, with the salt spray on my skin and the hand of a queen in mine, I realized that the cracks weren't holes at all. They were the places where the light finally managed to get in. I learned that honesty is the only currency that doesn't lose value when the world falls apart. I learned that you don't need a medal to be a hero. You just need to be the person who doesn't look away when someone else is drowning. Humanity isn't a species, it's a choice. It's the choice to be sincere when it's easier to be cynical. It's the choice to dance when the music is terrible and everyone is watching. I'm still a pilot who hates protocol and a liaison who drinks bad gin, but I'm finally at peace with the man in the mirror, because that man is the one who asked the Night Regent to dance. I wonder about you, out there in your own world. We all have our own Night Regents, those parts of our lives that seem too big, too cold, or too powerful to approach. We all have our own Europa, the memories that make us want to hide in the shadows. I spent 10 years being afraid of my own light. So I have to ask, what is the one dance you have been avoiding because you were afraid of the audience? What would happen if you finally stepped into the circle and offered your hand to the thing you fear the most? I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, worn-out coin, a lucky charm from my days in the flight academy. I tossed it into the ocean, watching it catch the moonlight before disappearing into the surf. "No more luck," I whispered. "Just honesty." Vespera smiled and took my hand, and together we walked back inside, leaving the door open to the night.